Hello, everyone, and welcome to our webinar, Cloud or On-Premise, Updating Assumptions on Secure Certificate Management. I'm Megan Murphy, Marketing Assistant at Sectigo, and I'll be moderating today's webinar. Presenting with us today, we have Sectigo's Chief Compliance Officer, Tim Callan. Hi, Tim. How are you?
Hey, Megan. I'm doing well.
Joining Tim will be CTO of PKI at Sectigo, Jason Soroko. How's it going, Jason?
Doing great, Megan. Thank you.
Now, before we get started, I'd like to go over a few housekeeping items. All attendees will remain on mute for the duration of the webinar, which we expect to be around 45 minutes, allowing for 15 minutes for Q&A at the end. You'll be able to submit any questions you might have using the chat throughout the webinar. That's it from me. Without further ado, Tim and Jason, take it away.
All right. So, Jason, on-premise systems are under attack.
Yeah, and I'll tell you what, even this slide that you're looking at right now, which
Yeah.
details some of the latest and greatest, it's almost hard to keep up.
Right. It's already out of date. Yeah.
What's in common to each of these different attacks is really just the fact that they're all on-prem.
Yeah.
And these are not, I mean, we're so used to hearing about phishing for credentials. Because that is the majority of how attackers are getting in. But I think what we're seeing here, Tim, is lately what the bad guys have been showing us is that vulnerabilities on-premise systems, quite often legacy on-premise systems, this is becoming a more popular way for the bad guys to establish a foothold. And unfortunately, in some of these cases, the foothold is persisting even till now and will probably be with us for a while. It's very tough to flush out the bad guys once they've come in this way.
Yeah, and there's been this assumption. I think we're probably going to get to this. So sorry if I'm going out of order, but then there's been this sort of unstated assumption, or even explicitly stated assumption, that a lot of IT people have had for many, many years, which is the closer it is to me, the more secure I feel, right? If it's in my racks, in my rooms, in my NOC, then I'm more secure, right? And what you see is this whole kind of spate of real world incidents that are undermining that basic premise.
Tim, I think that's probably one of the most important points and takeaways to this whole presentation is, when I'm off talking to customers, I for years and years, and even till today, there's still this idea that if the system has physical proximity to me as a CISO, as a CIO, as a director of IT, then it's more protected somehow.
Yeah.
It's either because I've got better visibility to it, a perceived visibility to it, or I've got monitoring systems that are on it. In every one of these examples, Tim, I'll pick on SolarWinds just for a moment here, and I'm not picking on them as a company. I'm just choosing as a topic because it's interesting. Probably one of the best companies in the world in terms of cybersecurity, right? Mandiant. These are the famous folks who do incident response around the world for cybersecurity attacks. They had a SolarWinds monitoring system within their enterprise network, and apparently, the way that Kevin Mandia described it, they one morning were having a meeting in the boardroom. Somebody from IT came in and said, "Hey, I think we're under attack." Well, don't forget, we're talking about some of the smartest people in the world to be able to investigate that. Even they had to scratch their heads before they realized, oh man, the attack coming in from a vulnerability from our own monitoring system.
Right.
And so really what it shows you is, I think, Tim, what's happened here is, I think the shoe has finally dropped in 2020, 2021. The shoe has finally dropped to think that if something is within your corporate network, that somehow it should just be automatically given more trust than anything else. In other words, everything outside of my corporate network is hostile, and everything inside my corporate network is not only less hostile but safe. I think that what all of these attacks and all the white hat research has taught us especially most recently, is that age is over.
Well, and if I may, Jay, I'm not even sure you're going far enough on that statement. So you're right. There's this assumption that the stuff inside my network is fundamentally safer. You're saying that it isn't fundamentally safer, but I think there are a lot of cogent arguments to be made, which you're going to make, that it's actually the opposite, that it's less safe.
It in fact, the reason why it is less safe is because of this overtrust. It's because of this tendency to put less reserves and resources into, hey, if something goes wrong here, if the bad guy establishes a foothold, then what are my secondary options? How am I protecting myself? And so it's a related issue, right?
Right.
It kind of goes hand in hand.
Yeah, and I don't want to get out of order. Do we want to call out Petit Patam in particular here?
I think, Tim, this idea of the shoe dropping, to me, this is the white hat community announcing the shoe has dropped.
Right.
And let me really explain this kind of an attack here. Basically, this is not necessarily, and thankfully, it's not necessarily something we've seen in the wild in terms of attacks, but it is something that white hat researchers have taught us hand in hand with. Most recently, at the most recent Black Hat, we saw a lot of Microsoft CA research come out talking about weaknesses. So let's keep in mind, Tim, the basis of the Petit Potem research and the attack behind it is essentially a 20-plus-year-old attack style known as NTLM relay. Because of the fact that the on-premise Microsoft CA system is tied so closely to Active Directory in terms of how it's used and how it runs, basically what has happened here is the bad guys have taken a very, very old attack style and perfected it against Microsoft CA. In other words, basically an unauthenticated attacker, as it says in the CVE, can call a method and basically coerce the domain controller to authenticate against another server. And if you really look at the details, I'll spare everybody the details here of reading through the CVE and truly understanding it. But basically, between a couple patches that Microsoft has released, you might think that, okay, you're done. You can, just wait for your patch Tuesday and it's over. Well, this attack is never over. It's been around for 20 years plus. And what it requires is an extensive set of investigations and soul searching on the part of your IT department to make sure that every single I is dotted and T is crossed in terms of your configuration. And that's also part of what was talked about at the last Black Hat in terms of other attacks against Microsoft CA, in the fact that it's just become so, there are so many open ways to attack MSCA on premise and so many misconfigurations that can make that attack possible, that the white hat researchers have had to issue a whole suite of pen testing tools as well as defensive diagnostic tools. And so this is the kind of thing that, all right, if you're going to have on-premise tools and you're going to feel confident about it, there has, even what you think you're best at as an IT person, which is making sure your configurations are right, what the white hat researchers have taught us is you're probably, even the best of you, are not prepared alone to make sure that even just your configurations are right, never mind to fight off bad guys once they've established a foothold. It's really quite a set of circumstances in the second half of 2021 that have come together to show us that the shoe really has dropped here, Tim.
Right. Okay, so what does this mean? So on-premise, we're going to dissect this, right? On-premise versus cloud. I think we're going to go into detail. You've given us a great framework for how to think about this problem. And at the end of the day, when we're done with this presentation, we want to come away really with the pros and cons from a security perspective of on-prem versus cloud.
Yeah, and at this point, you might wonder, is it purely PKI? Well, I really want to make you guys think about an overprivileged user just being on your corporate network where you're trusting things.
Mm-hmm.
So even things such as what's a very common thing, Tim, is authentication through a VPN.
Yeah.
Well, once you've authenticated through that VPN, you have whatever credentials you've been given to work across that network. What most IT administrators are thinking about is making sure people can get their job done. That's first and foremost, and that's a great thing. And thankfully, over the past 10 years, we've allowed people to work remotely, and it's a good thing. The problem is that the bad guys take advantage of this.
Yeah.
And the problem is, once the bad guy has a footing and has established that beachhead and has stolen a weak set of credentials for a VPN, or has taken advantage of a vulnerability in the domain controller, printer spooler, or wherever it is they happen to be, then really what it makes you think is, what happens if you stopped thinking about your resources as a network attached resource and started thinking about them more as an application? And so then how does that really express itself? And the way it expresses itself is, on-premise resources are typically, you're accessing them through some sort of network access boundary. In other words,
Mm-hmm.
how are you challenged in your authentication? Typically, it's from the network. Active Directory being a good example. With the cloud, you're typically talking about an application-specific authentication, meaning you're getting that fantastic idea of the principle of least privileges by default.
Right. You almost can't avoid it.
You
Or
almost
you
can't
have
avoid
to
it.
go to great lengths to avoid it.
That's it. And
Yeah.
Tim, I don't want to overuse that marketing buzz term, but zero trust. It's hard to ignore right now, but this really is the heart of what zero trust is about. And one of the many principles in zero trust is the movement towards application specific authentication, especially in the cloud, versus on-prem or network authentication.
And Jay, I don't know if this is in scope for today, and I don't want to disrupt your framework, but it might be interesting to understand as we look at these different factors, which we'll go starting on the next slide. To what degree does a rigorously applied ZTN strategy in network mitigate the vulnerabilities of being in network? To what degree does that cause that to match the cloud in terms of security and trustworthiness? I don't know if that's in scope for today, but I'm interested in that.
I'll tell you what, Tim, we will certainly get to that, and I promise you, be right before the end. If we haven't touched on it in a big way, we will, because I think that's an important topic to get to, that everybody needs to know, and it'll show you why digital identities are just absolutely fundamental in implementing any set of principles within ZTNA.
Okay, so let's get going on it. So first of all, I think this is just high-level security, and this is these are your assessments, your beliefs, but I think they're pretty defensible and non-controversial. So from a security perspective, on-premise PKI versus cloud PKI, what would you say?
I would say, Tim, from a security perspective, this is, if you and I were to have been talking to anybody listening to this podcast, webinar, however it is that, we're communicating out to customers, even face to face, once we're able to do that again.
Right.
I think it wasn't that long ago where if you were to poll people, even just a hallway conversation, hey, what's more secure, right? An on-premise PKI or a cloud PKI? I think that just that natural feeling, even if there was nothing backing it up empirically, there was just a feeling that if it was in proximity to me, an on-premise PKI has got to be more secure.
I own these machines. They're sitting in a room. I can look in the room and see that there's nobody in there I don't know. Right. Yep.
Yeah. And I think furthermore, right, hey, I've implemented antivirus. I've implemented my SIM. I've got an ops team that looks at that. And therefore, there's a bunch of controls that I've put into place, and I've done a bunch of expenditure and work and governance. And therefore, how possibly could my on-prem be less secure than a cloud PKI?
Right.
And I think what we're seeing, Tim, is, oh my goodness, when it comes down to, say, one of the most popular on-prem PKIs, Microsoft CA, one of the biggest mistakes I've heard in the past 15 years now is, well, you got to trust Microsoft at some point.
Mm.
That statement, I think we can put to bed. And let me tell you why. When you saw President Biden most recently have a whole slew of technology executives in the White House answering for, hey, why are we suffering so many attacks lately? Microsoft, being a very major operating system provider, basically had to admit, yes, we are at the heart of the reason why a lot of these attacks are occurring. And a lot of it was because, and let's face it, Active Directory, I'll call it broken from a security standpoint, but I think what we can agree is it's showing its age and it needs very significant investment. And Microsoft basically admitted that in not so many words by telling President Biden, hey, we're going to make a commitment to put $20 billion over the next 5 years into security. And I would say, not the least of which is going to have to go into on-prem Active Directory.
Yeah.
So therefore, if your on-prem PKI is dependent on Active Directory, I think that your assumptions about security and on-prem versus cloud PKI are obsolete. You need to understand that something that is removed and above the hierarchy of Active Directory and on-prem systems gives you that zero trust principle of having more of an application specific security versus a network dependent.
And if we can't trust Active Directory, like, how many enterprises are using Active Directory as their foundational source of truth on these things? Like,
a lot. And in fact, I think saying significantly most wouldn't even be out of.
I'm sure it's the majority of them. Yeah, and so wow, yeah, that's what a huge area of exposure.
It is.
All right. So perimeter defense, and we've touched on this already, but net it out for us.
Yeah, there's a whole pile of ideas here, Tim, and I really think that this whole idea that, yes, not only can I go into the server room and hug my servers, and that makes me feel good,
right?
But also, I have significant investment in monitoring, and I have significant investment in my firewalls, and I check my rules, and I think I'm pretty good at this stuff, right? Yeah. I think the problem is this is absolutely no different to the mistake made by the French in World War I with the Maginot Line. We're going to make this impenetrable defensive line, and we don't really have to defend the motherland in behind that line.
Yeah, and they're just going to go around it, and once they're inside, there's no defense at all. The defense in depth just doesn't exist.
Exactly. And so therefore, this idea that I think zero trust sums it up really nicely, even though it is a marketing term and it's getting quite confused in terms of a lot of vendors trying to push and pull the customers in terms of what it means. Really, the best way to think about it is perimeterless, as a concept. I think what you really should think about is what's the atomic level now of a perimeter? And that atomic level, Tim, is the identity.
If you're using the Maginot Line as an example, right, you're imagining a single contiguous piece of land with a border that you could draw without lifting your pencil, right? But what we need to think about it now is it's more like Micronesia, right? It's a whole bunch of islands, and every one of them needs to be defended individually.
That's a great example, Tim. And think about it like this. Everybody understands VPN. Well, what happens if every single connection, every single transaction, every single identity-based, authentication that's going on within your enterprise has that same level of strong authentication and strong encrypted tunnel of communication, it makes the life of the bad guy within the corporate network that much harder.
Right. Yep. And this is so much, if we go back to those attacks on the first slide, what a lot of those attacks were about was about lateral movement, right? You get in, you come in through the MS, through the printer spooler, and you go, well, what harm are you going to do? Are you going to waste my paper, right? But once you're in the printer spooler, you go to other places where the stuff that matters is, right?
We could have an entire webinar on the fun the bad guys have from the printer spooler. It's really quite something.
Yeah. All right. Operation requirements. So in-house capabilities, in-house dependencies versus flexibility and agility and scalability.
You know, Tim, when Microsoft CA, was in its earlier days, one of the things that was quite attractive about it to customers was, hey, it just comes with Windows, right? If I've paid my Windows Server license, I get this PKI. Fantastic. So therefore, there was this tagline of free PKI.
Right.
And how many times, did the analysts talk about, the death of PKI, which is just such a hilarious idea. Turned out to be not true at all. And in fact, free ended up being extremely, extremely expensive. And fast forward to March of 2020, Tim, how hard is it to get experienced people? How hard is it to get them to work in an office on-prem?
Oh, yeah.
These 19...
And even before COVID, this was a problem. I mean, the skills gap, this grotesque IT skills gap that every enterprise in the world is facing has been going on for increasingly for the past decade, I would say, and has been an overdrive for the last 5 years. And then COVID hit, so that even if you could hire the employees, it doesn't matter because they're not in the building.
Oh, Tim, I think what's not being said on this slide enough, but I'll say it verbally is, look, this is all about dollars and cents. It's about, not only do you have a problem, having enough experienced personnel to be able to run your on-prem PKI, but the other thing that has happened over the past shorter while, maybe 3 to 5 years, is the sheer amount of innovation that has been brought to bear on standing up CAs, especially private CAs. The ability to quickly stand up a CA in the cloud and then have that thing just run with minimal staff having to worry about it. The amount of innovations that's been brought to bear on that, I think is, if you're not aware of it, you really need to check that out. It's a very special area of innovation over the past while that everybody needs to understand better.
Right. Okay. So probably point made on that one. So configuration. So configuration of your PKI. The on-prem problem is more. It's just harder to do.
In fact, Tim, it's so hard to do that was an entire set of presentations at Black Hat with a set of open source configuration checking diagnostic tools to basically say to all IT directors, it's almost impossible to do it correctly yourself. You need help, and you need help from the white hat community to be able to do this. That's how onerous this is. And if you think about it, Tim, there's reasons for that. It's because the legacy on-prem PKIs were meant to do so much backwards compatibility with all sorts of Microsoft stack systems. Well, the problem now is, Tim, we're dealing with a world where not only you're dealing with Microsoft stack, but you're dealing with the cloud, you're dealing with mobile operating systems, and now you're even dealing with DevOps and IoT, which is a whole other kettle of fish. And so therefore, how many configurations are you going to be able to deal with? Well, first of all, that on-prem PKI, that legacy system, doesn't even have those configurations anyway. It doesn't even have those capabilities. So therefore, part of that innovation I was talking about in terms of cloud PKI that allows you to extend PKI into those technology stacks that you can't reach with the legacy PKI, and also the amount of configuration that's necessary is much less because of the fact that there's less dependencies to legacy systems, less dependencies in Active Directory, and additionally the fact that you are dealing with the experts in the field who can help you to make sure that your PKI is completely locked down.
Yeah, and that's a big point. And I've been sitting here trying to think of a good analogy for this, but there are so many places in our world where we outsource something to somebody who's very specifically focused on it. I could build my own automobile. I could get a lathe and machine the parts and put it together, and at the end of the day, have an automobile. It is within the realm of possibility, but it would be horribly inefficient, amazingly expensive, and my automobile would be very poor. And the reason for that is because I outsource that to people who are focused specifically on that task. And because they're supposed to focus specifically on that task, they are able to bring better expertise to it and ultimately do a better job.
Absolutely. And I would say, Tim, for anybody who has doubts of what you just said, in terms of saying, hey, I've been in the PKI business a long time, I know what I'm doing. Right. But if you've been keeping as close tabs on it as we have from a vendor standpoint, the amount of capability that's been brought to bear, the amount of innovation that's been put into identity management, certificate lifecycle management, this ain't your grandpa's PKI anymore.
Yeah. And even if we allow that, you started with a premise that for most enterprises is false, because most enterprises have the problem that they can't hire that expert, right? So even if we accept that there are some people in the world who know everything they need to know about PKI, there are fewer of them than there are jobs, right? And so somebody is stuck learning on the job. Somewhere, no matter how diligent you are or smart you are, there is some poor person who is learning on the job.
And I bet you that person, who's probably been around quite a long time, has almost minimal to no exposure to hot topics such as robotic process automation,
Right.
IoT, DevOps. Those things probably aren't even in the realm of your local PKI expert, even if you do happen to have one.
Yeah, that's true. It's expert of more than just PKIs. How does it fit into these other macro trends that are so important to the CIO right now?
And that's where Cloud PKI can really help you out.
Price structure.
Right, dollars and cents.
Yeah.
What used to be, hey, we're going to take, hey, for those of you who've been around for a long time, experienced CIOs and CISOs, PKIs back 15 years ago plus, think about how many professional services people you needed. Think about how long it took and the risks that was in place to set up a full-blown PKI for your authentication systems.
Right.
Compare and contrast that to now. Tim, pop quiz, within your most recent experience, how long on average now is it taking to set up a private CA once the certificate structure has been agreed on? I mean, I'm thinking in the realm of hours instead. It's not even days, it's hours now.
Yeah. Rather than weeks.
And so and rather than months or sometimes even up to a year. All right. I mean, I guess the point we're making here is, for those of you who remember the bad old days of the original PKIs that had to be all things to all people, you were probably implementing a PKI that was meant to do everything from large finance systems to passport systems, and you was also going to handle your human authentication. Whereas now, with a more purpose-built and streamlined PKI of today, the cost structures are completely different.
Yeah, absolutely. And this again, we could bring up so much evidence of this fundamental basic point, right? Why why am I using SaaS applications of anything, right? When I could build it myself? Well, one of the big reasons is building it myself is ridiculously expensive, right? We all could hire coders and code in C++, and at the end of the day, we can have whatever it would be, right? We could have payroll processing, but we outsource our payroll processing because it's just so much more cost effective to go with a vendor who can apply this knowledge and ability across all of their customers. Right?
And by the way, Tim, I'll put an asterisk on what you just said.
Okay.
Once you're done building your own PKI, within about 4 or 5 years, when you have to start worrying about quantum resistant certificates, go ahead and build that in your backyard too. Good luck with that.
Sure. Yeah. We haven't even gotten to that. I don't even know if we're getting to that today. Security risks. Yeah, we touched on this, but this is important. This is kind of where we started, right? You can get into the soft underbelly.
Yeah, Tim, I think where I'd like to touch on here again, because it's a point that needs to be made. A lot of on-premise PKI systems have some sort of dependency on the operating system, and that operating system dependency quite often is tied to network authentication.
Mm-hmm.
That's a real long way of saying Active Directory again.
And that's AD, right? And we have already established that that's unreliable. So your foundation of the whole thing is unreliable.
That's right. And even if you say to me, look, I'm not using AD, I've got some sort of fancy Kerberos setup, I've got some other form of IDP that I'm doing network authentication to, the real point to be made here is, we pick on Active Directory because it's an easy target, but even if you're not using that, if your PKI on-prem is tied to any form, has any sort of dependencies in the operating system, and is tied mostly to authentication of the network, then you are working in a way that's contrary to modern best practices, period. This is what I really love about cloud PKI, because it is more application focused. It allows you to do the best job possible of taking advantage of zero trust network architecture principles,
Mm-hmm.
and basically creating those natural, that perimeterless concept of protecting your digital identities. It is more purpose built for that, and I don't think that point is made enough to people who are architecting modern network enterprises right now.
Yeah, and the other point, I don't think we've touched this anywhere, so it deserves probably being touched now, is, again, you get this efficiency, right? If you have a single cloud service that you can apply to many different use cases and many different, what do I want to say, individual, users, enterprises, if you will, then there's one place where you can focus on security, right? So your cloud PKI provider is aware of the 0 days when they're revealed and is responding to them in real time, as opposed to you take this service and you spread it out across 5,000 different enterprises, and every one of those 5,000 different enterprises now needs to be aware of the 0 days, right? And the bad guys get into the ones who are not, right? Part of what the bad guys do, you have to fortify everything, and the bad guys just have to find one point of ingress. And so, you're responsible for knowing all of the things that are coming up and blocking all of those holes, as opposed to you let a specialist focus on that. And they can put the focus on it and put the resource on it because they know that this is applying to hundreds or thousands of enterprises.
Yeah, Tim, that is very true. I think for those of you who are really truly living an on-prem world, that Patch Tuesday is hard. and basically, if you're living with a more cloud native type of scenario, then you're leaving it to the experts who really do understand their systems best. And you can do what you do best, which is to make sure your system, your people are working, making sure that everybody's productive. and there's a lot less thinking about, hey, is system X patched with 1.1 or 1.2, which is the reality of a lot of people in on-prem systems.
Yeah. And what's interesting is there's so many other areas, like, I'm just to name a vendor, pick a vendor, Salesforce, right? How many people are perfectly comfortable with the idea of saying, I'm not going to go back to the old days of having my own lead database, right? Because I appreciate that there's so many advantages to having this centralized in the one place, and they can do all these things for me. And yet when we get to PKI, for some reason they want to go back to the days of the cave people. Okay, so moving on, configuration control. So this is an interesting one because you might assume, control in particular, you might assume that on-prem's going to win. And clarify this one for me, Jay.
Sure, Tim. You know what? I think one way that we could even change the title here is configuration complexity control.
Okay.
And so therefore, I think this just is a continuation of a thread of something we talked about earlier, which is when you're dealing with a PKI that has natural dependencies on an operating system or on a network architecture, and is somehow tied into an IDP that is 25 years old and is showing its age. It almost doesn't matter what you do. You're going to have so much complexity in your configuration that there are going to be open holes. I think that with the cloud, a cloud-based PKI, you are so much more purpose built. You have so much less dependency on legacy systems that are broken. You have so much more control over the things that are most important to you and so much more visibility over systems. You know what? Let me give you another example we haven't brought up yet, Tim, which is the world of DevOps.
Okay.
So let's say you rolled your own PKI with an open source system such as OpenSSL underneath a Kubernetes cluster, right? Let's get into the weeds for a moment.
Sure.
I don't know if a lot of CIOs and CISOs are aware, but every single Kubernetes cluster, which is a DevOps container engine, actually will be running its own certificate authority.
Right.
Well, that should scare the heck out of you, because who is running that PKI? Who set it up?
Right.
Who is giving it governance? How much visibility do you have to the certificate definitions that are defined there?
What decisions did they make? What's going to happen when the quantum threat becomes overwhelming? Am I going to be confident? Am I still going to be using old, unreliable cryptography in my DevOps environments because nobody even is aware that PKI is there?
Am I using SHA-1 signed certificates?
Right.
Right. Am I using deprecated cryptographic algorithms? Exactly.
Yeah.
Do you have visibility to any of this in your Kubernetes cluster certificate authority?
Yeah.
If you don't know the answer to that, you have homework. And so therefore, this is what a cloud-based PKI is designed to do. It is designed to give you visibility to that so that you can have a semblance of governance. Without visibility, you can't have governance.
Gotcha. I think that clarifies a lot. That's a good one. So, all right. So the netting it out, Jay.
Right. Why choose a cloud-based PKI? It's a lot of things we just said.
Yeah.
For those of you who basically want to hug your server, listen, for some of you it might not be an option. You have to hug that server, and ripping and replacing is just too hard.
Yeah.
And for those of you who that's the world you're living in, the one thing that's not said on this slide that I'd like to iterate here is, you know what? A cloud-based PKI can help to augment your on-prem PKI. That's an important point. I think, though, that for those of you who are deciding net new, hey, I need a new authentication system because I have a lot of remote workers and I have to be able to manage them, right? That's the reality of a lot of people who aren't dealing with legacy systems. They're trying to decide on what to do now. And for those of you who are making that decision, consider the cost of running things on-prem. It's more expensive than you think.
So back to my earlier question, to what degree can I do a really good job of ZTNA and get to the same place?
I would say, Tim, that since identity is the new perimeter, if you will, and that's the real heart of ZTNA and zero trust, not over trusting what's inside your network.
Right.
I think that if you're trying to decide how do I get to there from here, especially in terms of choosing a PKI, I think by choosing a cloud-based PKI,
Right.
what you're getting that automatically nets you principles of zero trust.
Yeah. I think it's a false choice, right? I think Cloud PKI actually makes your ZTNA implementation easier and more comprehensive and more reliable and more robust.
Well, one principle, one of many principles that's I think very important to highlight is this whole idea of network authentication versus application authentication.
Yeah.
So in other words, VPN is a form of network authentication,
Right.
and we now know that it's too privileged.
It's risky.
It's risky. Why take on that risk? And so therefore, let's get yourself logged into an application. You mentioned Salesforce.
Yeah.
When you're using Salesforce in the cloud, you are logging into Salesforce, the application.
Right.
And in fact, even if it's a robotic process automation, it's an API that's being talked to, right? It's an application level authentication, not a network authentication. So you get, even if you did nothing else and you went with a cloud-based PKI and you were asked by your boss, the CEO, the CFO, hey, what are we doing to move towards zero trust network access, network architecture? One thing you could say is, well, I'm moving towards an application-based authentication scheme. I am moving away from a network-based authentication scheme. Right there, an important principle you're putting into place.
Yeah.
And then you also have the fundamentals to put into place many of the other principles of ZTNA.
Right. Yep. Agreed. All right. If you like this conversation, as you can tell, Jason and I talk about this kind of stuff a lot, and we record it. And we do have a podcast. It's called Root Causes. That's a pun. PKI and Security Podcast. Go to wherever you listen to podcasts. Search for Root Causes PKI. You will find us as the first result. And please join us. We go deep on all kinds of topics like this or subtopics of what we talked about today. We cover current news items and we define a lot of things, explain a lot of things, and there's a lot of content, more than 180 episodes up already, and we're producing new ones every week. So, please come join us. And with that, I think we're right on time for questions. So, Megan, have we gotten any questions?
Yeah,
Okay.
Tim, we got a few great questions. So the first one, regarding FedRAMP approved PKI TLS cert vendors, how do the controls differ and what are the security/compliance objectives when compared with non-FedRAMP solutions? And is there a service frontrunner to recommend?
Holy smokes. Jay, I can't answer that. Do you have an idea on that one?
Yeah, well, I think I think it would be a bad idea to go all the way through what the FedRAMP rules are. But what we are talking about here is a bridging, right? I'm not going to get into vendors who do that, except to say that what's very important to note is FedRAMP has a very specific set of guidelines, governances that people have to conform to. And the most important thing to be able, if you want to be able to interoperate with FedRAMP, is this whole idea of PKI bridging. So therefore, certificates that are issued on behalf of FedRAMP need to be basically cross-signed with FedRAMP, and there's a whole set of procedures around that. It's it's kind of an interesting question because it's not quite related to all of this, except to say that uh, I think a cloud-based PKI is perfectly applicable to be able to do a cross-signed bridging with FedRAMP. So that's the very, very short answer to what could be a long answer.
Next question. Can I assume that your solution has a per certificate fee structure?
Tim, can you decipher that one?
Yeah, I don't know that you can assume that. So I think we're talking about I don't know if we're talking about CLM, Certificate Lifecycle Management, if we're talking about private CA, right? Because those are both things that we offer. In the case of no, I don't believe that has to be the case at all. You're going to have an instant. It's not actually, if we're issuing your certs, if you're talking about our public certs, then obviously that will be in pricing bands based on the public certs. But if you're issuing your own private CA, I think once you set it up, you can do the number of certs you're going to do. And if we're looking at CLM, you don't have to make that assumption either. I think if so, based on a question, I'm not sure exactly which of those areas we're talking about, but all of them, you have the flexibility to be structured in a way that makes sense for the client. So get into that if that's interesting to you. Get into that with whoever you're talking to over here, and they can help you explore those options.
Next question. We are working towards zero trust and are partway there. How does cloud PKI fit into that scenario?
Yeah, I think we touched on that a little bit. Basically this whole idea of network-based versus application-based authentication is the one that we went through already. I think just to put a bonus mark on to answer that question, part of what you're also going to be able to say is, if you look at the NIST guidance on zero trust network architecture, PKI is listed as being fundamental because of the fact that identities really are at the heart of a lot of the principles. And so therefore, if you're going to have a proliferation of identities, because of the fact that identity is going to be the new perimeter within this set of principles, you're going to need a way to be able to manage all of those certificates. And a modern certificate lifecycle management system based off PKI is what will help to get you there. And as Tim and I were talking about, the innovation that's gone into that is going to allow you to not have to deal with the enormous amounts of legacy and technical debt that unfortunately are holding a lot of people back on-prem systems. So I think that there are a couple principles that are directly related, and you get just a check mark automatically with the cloud-based PKI, but also it's going to help you with all the principles that are part of it.
Yeah.
Next question. I understand the idea that a PKI expert will do better than a generalist at protecting my identities. Can I solve that problem by hiring the appropriate expert in-house?
Yeah. Well, again, in theory, you can go a long way, but people are having trouble doing that. One of our other coworkers here at Sectigo, who's been in the PKI industry for more than 20 years, likes to point out that it takes 20 years to have 20 years of experience, right? And he's absolutely right. Like there's just the usefulness as these concepts like ZTNA and software defined perimeter have exploded in their use cases. The amount of corresponding need for understanding of PKI has exploded. So, if you go back in time to 1995, where, we had Ethernet running and plugging into the back of our computers, the use cases were extremely limited, and the number of people who had to know it were similarly limited. And now it's everything digital, and as a consequence, it's just gone. And the amount of stuff that's digital is so much vaster. It's just not keeping up. So yeah, if you have that person. Now we've talked about some of these other things. The reason that a vendor can put more into making sure that all of the bugs are fixed and all that kind of stuff, and that's all there as part of it too. But even then, I don't think you can really hire that person. Like, I know there's some people in the world, but there are many fewer of those people in the world than there are people who are trying to hire them. So someone's not going to have a chair when the music stops.
Next question. Do I need to implement zero trust architecture before it's worthwhile to consider cloud PKI?
I think it should be the opposite. Would you agree, Tim? I think really you right now you have fish to fry. You've got remote work authentication issues. You want to be connecting to your partners. You're going through a digital transformation. That's your business reality today. Those are the things you should be concentrating on. Implementing a cloud-based PKI now allows you to augment, legacy systems that you have, including MSCA. It allows you to take care of use cases that span not just, the traditional authentication use cases, but also modern use cases such as IoT, DevOps, RPA, etc. I would say that zero trust as a set of principles should guide what you're doing through time. In other words, don't make the old mistakes of relying on legacy systems. Look towards a better set of best practices as you're building things, and eventually you will be able to say, hey, you know what? I have implemented most of the principles of ZTNA, and I think we've done a good job. I think ZTNA is a destination, not something that you
right. You don't go out to the store and come home with a box of ZTNA and install it and say all done.
Contrary
right?
to what a lot of vendors are telling you right now.
And rather, it's a lifestyle, right? And yeah, to your point, Jay, and I think this is an extremely important point. The benefits of cloud PKI are there and are important, and are these slides that went through. Even if you're really not trying to be ZTNA, you get those benefits anyway. You get the efficiency, the cost efficiency, the scalability, the improved security, the defeating of cross system attacks, lateral movement being shut down. All of those things are true, even if nobody has written the letters ZTNA in a row on any whiteboard anywhere in your company.
I tell you what, Tim, can I just add a few words here towards the end? If you are somehow giving less trust to your internal corporate network, in other words, if you are treating it more like the hostile public internet and less like a personal playground of safety, you are doing ZTNA.
Right.
Next question. Does Cloud PKI cover the full set of certificate types, environments, and uses that are in a complicated enterprise?
Yeah, that's a great question, Jay. So, we all talk about SSL, but what about other stuff? What about client certs? What about a SPIME? What about doc signing?
Heck, what about SSH?
What about SSH?
Yeah, so I tell you what, not all PKIs are created equal. This is where we could get into the sales pitch, but really where I want to concentrate here is to say that that's how, when you're making your procurement choices, take a look at a vendor that is future-proofing you by having a full breadth. You don't want to go off and get a machine identity focused certificate lifecycle management system that was built in the 1990s that forgets about the fact that there's all kinds of human authentication use cases that are incredibly important right now.
Right.
And
that's where we've seen a lot of the growth, right? Is we all been doing TLS a long time. Like we get TLS. It's these other areas where it gets you get into more dangerous territory.
Yeah, and we don't want to have to learn more tools. We don't want to have to procure our SSL certs from a different vendor than where we do our certificate lifecycle management. I think the ability to wrap it all into one package, that's an important procurement consideration, and so keep that in mind.
Yeah. So, but just to bring it back home, the answer is, and correct me if I'm wrong, Jay, but the answer is yes, you should be able to cover the full set of certificate needs you have, and you should be able to find a solution that does that for you. Is that right,
That is
Jay?
correct. I think you should demand that from your vendors.
Okay, got it.
This will be the last question.
Okay.
You talk about using IT resources in other ways. Would removing PKI tasks necessarily mean that the people freed up have the appropriate skill set for the other things I want them to be doing?
Right. We talked about this. This is when we were talking about the skills gap in people, and we had some writing on the slide about this, right? About, freeing them to do other things. So, yeah. So, right. We've got our IT resources. They're under resourced. They're trying to do other things with their time. Are these translatable skills? Can I take somebody who used to be doing my certificate management or setting up my private CA, and can I apply them to the other IT needs that I have, or development needs that I have, Jay?
Sure. I tell you what, Tim, I would say an interesting career path for somebody who's worked on, MSCA for a long time in and around that area. That is a great candidate within your enterprise to be a risk officer, to be a compliance officer, to be a person who might not have the hands-on skills of, running Ansible scripts for DevOps, but they're going to be the perfect person to scrutinize the CA underneath your Kubernetes cluster.
Right.
They're going to be the perfect person to look at, hey, the certificates that I'm issuing out to humans and to my devices and to everywhere else, what are the appropriate lifespans, right? Those are the things that person has been obsessing over for years. Just probably in a more technical way, that person can probably elevate themselves to being more looking very specifically at evaluating and measuring risks and doing the diagnostics, doing the double checks, and also helping with your procurement for modern PKI. That person probably has a lot of translatable skills.
And the other thing I'm going to add there is that, we focused a lot on like that specific deep knowledge to make sure your PKI is done correctly. There's also a whole lot of stuff that just begs to be automated, right? There's tracking my certificates and installing my certificates and ordering my new certificates and et cetera, et cetera. And the people who are doing that are skilled professionals, right? And they could be doing whatever else their skills are when they're doing that. Because, none of us went to college and took a course on tracking certificates in a spreadsheet, right? So that means that we took our courses on other stuff and spent our attention on other stuff, but now we're stuck tracking certificates in a spreadsheet. So in that regard, to the degree that you take those things and you automate them and you take them away from, the person with their hands on the keyboard, you are freeing that individual to do whatever other skills they had, which is why you brought them in the first place.
There's a lot of other areas to take inventory risks. And that is that in any form of security, taking inventory of your risks is incredibly important. That professional would be very good at that.
Right. All right. So thank you. Once again, join us, Root Causes of PKI Security Podcast. I think we're at our time limit. Thank you for joining us today. Thank you, Megan. Thank you, Jay.
Take care.
Thank you.